Hey everyone, and welcome to this week's SheFab webinar. We've got two absolutely amazing guest speakers today, I can tell you. And for those of you that are aware, I'm sure you're all super excited. And for those of you who are not aware, then you absolutely should be, because these two human beings are absolutely amazing, and what they're doing is absolutely tremendous. And you know, here at SheFab, we celebrate them, and we're very honoured and humbled to have you here today, Jorden and Radhika. So my name's Shelle Fantastic, again, for those of you that don't know, and I'm the president of SheFab, a joint enterprise between SheFanPro and Fintech and Blockchain Association. So I think without further ado, I'm going to hand right over to our lovely colleague, Soumya, who will take over and make the introductions. So sit back, enjoy, and Soumya, over to you.
Thank you, Ms. Shelle. So good evening, everyone. I would like to quote Mr. Nelson Mandela. Education is the most powerful weapon you can use to change the world. That's the motto of SheFab as well as SheFanPro. And with that intention, today we have our guest speakers, Ms. Radhika Iyengar Emens and Mr. Jorden Woods, to talk about Web3 for social impact. That's today's topic. So Radhika and Mr. Jorden Woods both are co-founding partners of StarChain Ventures. So as always, men agree, or gentlemen agree, ladies go first. So today I would like to first talk a few words about Ms. Radhika Iyengar Emens. Ms. Radhika Iyengar Emens is Web3 expert and author. She's top 100 women of the future. She co-founded a book named Enterprise Blockchain Has Arrived, and that's on Amazon, so you can go and purchase it. So obviously the co-founder is Mr. Jorden Woods. And similarly, she's TEDx talk speaker. She's a keynote speaker, board executive, venture operator, mentor shaper, enterprise blockchain, DeFi healthcare, and AI expert. So not only that, she's a great management expert. So I welcome Ms. Radhika Iyengar Emens. And before welcoming both of them, I would like to also say a little more about Mr. Jorden Woods. Otherwise, I would not be able to do justice. So, but still, Mr. Jorden Woods, he's got a huge list of credits, and I don't think I'll be able to finish reading out everything, because you see it's too huge, and I think the seminar would finish if I start quoting everything. So simply I would say he's mission-driven Web3 tech expert, and he's an author. He co-authored with Ms. Radhika Iyengar Emens, same book I mentioned. He's a keynote speaker. Not only that, he's an astrophysicist. So physics is my favorite subject, and that's the reason I really respect him a lot. And not only that, he's the future of business host, NFT, metaverse, enterprise blockchain, DEI, impact, sustainability, space, etc. expert. So whatever you need, it's all here in his brain. So you can always approach him. And if you need any management advice, you can always approach Ms. Radhika Iyengar Emens. So without wasting too much of time, I would like to hand over the dives to both of them.
Thank you very much. So thank you, Soumya and Shelle, and nice to be here. And team. What we are going to do is we have a presentation for today, and so I'll just go ahead and share the presentation. So just give me a moment to find it. So let's see, just want to make sure I get the right one. So let me know when you can see the presentation.
Yeah, we've got it.
Okay, so yes, thank you for having us today. And so we will be talking about Web3 for social impact, and it's great to be here to speak to the SheFab community. The first slide is kind of a summary of what you've already said. And so I'll just leave that up there for a few moments, just so that people can kind of go through it. But like you said, we do speak extensively. We have been working with the entrepreneurial ecosystem for decades, and we're very much focused on social impact. And within the last 7 years, very much focused on blockchain technology, Web3, and social impact has been kind of a lifelong pursuit, as well as sustainability.
If I could, I'll just add that a lot of the work that we're doing has been at the forefront of this technology, and in the sense that we were one of the first people to recognize the value of this technology across multiple sectors. And I'll just add that there is a policy component as well that I'd like to highlight, because I think it's really important to have technology-friendly policy. And so this is something that I also work at the intersection of. If we don't have the right policy frameworks and laws and compliances and rules and regulations that actually support innovation, it becomes much more difficult for that innovation to happen. So that's something that Jorden and I also are involved in, as well as ecosystem building across this spectrum, which also, again, supports the innovation environment.
Yeah, so with that, one of the things that Soumya spoke about is our book, which was published in 2019. If you'd like to learn more about it, there is a QR code there. But we do cover many of the key Web3 use cases. And the whole book, even though it's called Enterprise Blockchain Has Arrived, it's all about Web3 from the first sentence, actually, all the way through the end of the book. It's all about the rise of Web3. It's just when we published the book in 2019, no one knew what Web3 was. So we didn't talk about Web3 in the title, but Web3 is throughout the book. And there are interviews with 20 business experts as well. About half of the book is our content, and about half of the book are interviews, which are very valuable, because the idea is that this is for practitioners, people who are very active, and we have a community, which we'll talk about, which is very much focused on actually using the technology, not just talking about it. And we're very much focused on how do these technologies, so decentralized technologies, so Web3 technologies, play with AI and IoT. We do talk about generative AI, in the book, which is obviously is a very big thing right now, as well as IoT, which is the Internet of Things. And we'll be going through some of these things today. But with that, Radhika, do you want to get us kicked off?
Sure. So I think, let's just start with the why. I think that's a really good place to start. Anytime we look at technology, it's really not technology for technology's sake. You always start with the why and say, why does this technology even exist? And to that extent, Web3 is more than just a technology. It's an ethos. There's a new way of looking at things, and the constructs of what we have are being challenged and moved forward, I would say. And so if we look at what the Web3 ethos is all about, it's about shared data. And yes, there are ways to share it now, but we will get into why the differences exist and how that Web3 looks at sharing data across untrusting parties in a new way. Here in the Web2 environment, we've always talked about sharing data across trusted parties. You might share a document, you might share a file, etc. What we're talking about is sharing data across an ecosystem with untrusting parties, and that's something really extraordinary to think about. The other thing is peer-to-peer. Currently, trust is built by usually central intermediaries that basically establish that trust between two sides or two parties, right? With peer-to-peer, you can go directly with one another. And so I think that peer-to-peer relationship, the direct relationship, means that trust is established through the network rather than through an intermediary. We're also talking about decentralization, which is, again, a huge concept, because instead of having one central authority, which we'll talk about a little bit further, we're now going to have decentralized nodes on a network, which again establish that trust across the ecosystem. It's also community driven. So open source code and all of the drivers that help shape this ethos are really all about community, in fact. And so the power of the community, doing by the community, for the community, it's something that we will talk about further as well, but that is something that's also part of the ethos. And then finally, two last things. One is that it's self-governing, which is an incredible concept in and of itself. If some of us, I remember the days when I went to college and we had an honor code system. It was a self-governing sort of student body. And that was pretty empowering because, again, the trust was that everyone would kind of be self-governing in this system. In this method, in Web3, we're really talking about decentralized autonomous organizations and governance structures that are also decentralized and self-governing. And finally, we come to the point of power symmetry, which is that when you have trust that is established across the system and shared data across an ecosystem, everyone has access to that same information. And that creates a unique power symmetry because it comes from everyone having the same knowledge or information symmetry, which also then leads to power symmetry. Jorden, you were saying?
Yeah, and so I was just going to say that this is, Radhika said this is really the why, right? And so the why of Web3 for social impact is because everyone's voice is heard. Everyone within the system has power and has the ability to participate and be part of the decision-making process and have access to the same information. If you look at Web 2 systems where you have one central authority, and we'll get into this in a moment, it's actually, Web 2 systems are not a good foundation for social impact because you have very much of someone with power talking to someone without power, right? With a self-governing Web3 type of an ecosystem, you have the ability for all players to have, a greater fairness and a greater say in how the community operates, how resources are distributed, and how everyone works together. So this is really where we see that the why is that if you don't have Web3, you can't really have social impact. And so if you do have Web3, this is a start. It isn't the end, but it's a start for actually having a true democratized, fair type of ecosystem. And we'll get into that a little bit more as we go through the presentation. In terms of the Web3 drivers of transformation, Radhika talked about this kind of trustless environment, right? You have peers that are interacting with each other. Therefore, you need to have a network which provides truth. So a blockchain really provides this secure source of truth so that you're dealing with information that is verified, is authentic. And now I don't need to know you. I don't need to go through a party that says you're trustworthy. The network provides the trust, and all of the transactions are recorded and available for all to see. This also combined with a shared ledger across distrusting parties, like Radhika had talked about, enables you to build trust across an entire ecosystem that can include all of the different players, including competitors, including other organizations that you don't know. And this is, again, this extreme transparency that Web3 has. And we'll talk about that more, and we'd love to take any questions on that. But then, if you're going to have this kind of an ecosystem, you have to have a way to automate all of the decentralized transactions because they're happening everywhere throughout the ecosystem. If you've heard of smart contracts, this is where smart contracts come in. And then tokenization of everything. You've probably heard of NFTs and, cryptocurrencies and, the idea that you can tokenize any kind of data or information in the online world. And Radhika mentioned open source, which is, again, the sense of extreme transparency and the ability for everyone in the community to see and work together. And there are no secrets, right? There are no secrets within these types of organizations or these types of ecosystems. So this is really, again, the why of why Web3 is a critical foundation point. And without Web3, you cannot actually have a foundation for social impact and where the people who are being impacted actually have a say in how resources and monies are being distributed and how they are interacting with all of these things and building their future within this type of an ecosystem.
I could add, before we get into this slide, I'll just say that, you talked about not having secrets across an ecosystem. The truth is that, there is a way to protect confidential information. I think that's very important to understand. And the fact that we are sharing information, it's a set of information that we all agree is going to be important for the sustenance or sustainability of that ecosystem. So this is commonly agreed set of shared data that is made available to all the nodes on the network. So there is a way to protect confidentiality of information where it needs to be protected, be it trade secrets, IP, etc. Those are concepts and those are actual tangible sorts of issues that are very important to enterprise, for example. And so there are ways that you can construct these blockchain networks to protect that confidentiality, but again, also be able to share key sets of data across the network.
Yeah, and so, this is why there's a difference between what's called enterprise blockchain, where you can keep information confidential, and then what's called permissionless blockchain or public blockchain, as it's often known. Which is the more commonly thought of, Bitcoin and Ethereum types of networks where all of the information is available. There's more advanced topics that we could get into in terms of zero knowledge proofs and, secrets sharing, but this is really just a primer. It's really just a very basic kind of presentation. But let's just take a look at the Web 2.0 cloud that we're all familiar with, right? And that we use every day. Well, there's one owner of this system, right? So this might be a social media company. It might be a bank. It might be, even just a small company, right? That has access and ownership of all the data on the system. You might think you own something in these systems. You put up pictures or, you share information like on LinkedIn. We don't own any of that data that we give to the network, right? All of that is owned by LinkedIn. We give up ownership as soon as we put it out into the network. And there's only one central copy of the data. I mean, they may have multiple internal copies, but there's really just one central copy because one owner owns everything, right? It's not shared outside of whatever that organization might be. And because there's a lot of manipulation of this data, it tends to be kind of weak security, because if you add security layers, it becomes more expensive to process. And as a result, it's very easy for privacy to be compromised. And we hear about this every day, that, privacy is being compromised, security is weak, there's all types of hacking that goes on. And because these systems, really aggregate millions and millions or even billions of data of people's data, they become what's called a honeypot. And so it's actually, from a risk reward standpoint, there's a lot of gain of attacking these systems and exfiltrating information and monetizing. So you constantly get a lot of security breaches. And it's not easily auditable because, people don't have access to it, right? It's very easy not only to hide, have a lot of secrets, have complete secrecy from the rest of the world, but you can also go in because the data is changeable and you can modify the past, right? So you could say something happened that didn't because you have access to all the data, you own it, you can manipulate and you can change it. So in a blockchain ecosystem.
One thing I wanted to add, because I think people might not quite understand this fully, is that when you have one central owner of data, that owner really has complete command and control over everything that happens in that environment, right? And the ownership comes from us consenting to give that ownership to that central authority or the central entity. So if you've ever used any platform, what do you first sign? You agree to a set of rules and saying, I sign away pretty much everything that there's no ownership for me. That end user license agreement is that consent, which says, I agree. And if you don't agree, you can't use the system. So you're kind of in tight spot there. You have to agree in order to be able to use the platform. But when you do consent and you do sign and check the box and say, I agree, in order to install the software and have everything run properly, you're basically consenting to have everything that you're producing on that platform owned by that authority or that central entity. So I just wanted to make that clear, is that in a central authority kind of system, it is changeable because that central entity owns everything. And there are, as Jorden pointed out, weak points in the system where it doesn't address privacy or security or auditability to the extent that we would like to have it today.
Yeah. Now, in blockchain systems, over on the right, kind of this diagram that you see here is you have a bunch of nodes, right? So those are the nodes in the network. They create trust and what's called a single source of truth. They jointly own the system, right? So all the data is jointly owned by, these could be the players that are putting data out there. They own, basically the access and the and all the information that's within the system. If it's for example, a permissioned blockchain network. So this is what you might have with enterprises. We'll talk more about what's called self-sovereign identity, but we can own everything that we have, and we can have other people, like other networks, consent to us that they will only use our information in certain ways. So blockchain enables the flipping of the whole ownership model so that we own our data, we can monetize our data, we have control. And this sets up a very different dynamic where rather than one group monetizing and owning all the data, you have many, many different groups, and the actual rightful owners of the information, creators, etc., owning and being able to monetize. So it sets up a incredibly different dynamic where you have everyone being able to make money and, have, once you own something, that gives you the ability to do all kinds of things, including monetization, but you can build off of it. If you don't own anything, you can't build off of it, and you're never going to make any money. And so this is why basically in these ecosystems, you have 3 or 4 companies that own all the data online, and they're worth trillions of dollars, right? Because they own all the data. But if you take that trillion of dollars and you unpack it, now all the individuals can share in the value of that data. So in the blockchain network, each member has a copy of the data, and we'll talk about not only can you have a copy of the data, because this gives you extreme transparency, but you can have also, like I was mentioning, ownership of your data. Also, because the network is about this secure source of truth, because it is the truth within the system that everybody uses to say what happened, between all the different parties. It has to be ultra secure, and it can be private in certain cases. And so privacy is very important. And if you look at all blockchain networks, there is a way to protect privacy at many, many different levels, even though the information is available to everyone. And this is done because it's you have a long address, which is called a wallet address in most systems, and there's no way to know specifically who this person is that controls or owns this data or is part of the network. There's ways of unmasking, which we can get into in more complex or more sophisticated ways of talking about this. But basically, everyone within the system can be anonymous and can have their privacy protected. And because you have all the information in the network, which is timestamped, it's signed by all of the different members who are part of the ecosystem, and it goes all the way back to the beginning of time. A blockchain is basically a bunch of blocks that are chained together from the very beginning of time to the current moment. You can have a complete transparent audit trail all the way back to the beginning, and you can see which groups were involved. And so it's very easy to audit. So it's built for audit. It's built for transparency. So this is a, kind of a system which is, again, a foundation point for a social impact type of infrastructure. And Web 2 is definitely not, because it's built off of disparity. It's built off of inequity. It's built off of inequality. And so equality, equity, and democratization are the core of Web 3, whereas it's just the opposite under Web 2. So we wanted to put that out as the foundation point.
I'll add one more thing, because I agree with everything you've said, Jordan. The thing to remember is that Web 2 systems were not built for privacy or security or transparency by design. If you think about what Web 2 is based on, it's based on the internet, which is based on the TCP/IP protocol, which is really a communication protocol. It's packets of information that are sent and received, and that's all it was ever meant to do. It was meant to communicate information. And I think what we've seen with Web 2 is that we've really gone to a very rich way of sharing information across the globe. But it really wasn't meant to do anything other than that. If you're thinking about privacy and security and compliance, and you're thinking about key things that need to be protected, you need a different system. And that is what this Web 3 is based on. It's based on a new precept of a whole system being constructed for, number one, extreme transparency, for empowerment and democratization, as Jorden was talking about, for security and for privacy and compliance by design. And so this is not something that's bolted on after the fact. It's really foundational. And that's something that we wanted to make very clear.
Yeah, and people might ask, well, you hear about all of these, fraud, and you hear about scams, and you hear about people losing their data, et cetera, et cetera. This happens because people use Web 3 tech, but they have a Web 2 front end. And the Web 2 front end, like if you look at a centralized exchange like an FTX, or you look at a company that is using Web 2 systems that are based on a, Discord, or is based off of Twitter or something like this. These are all Web 2 front ends. And Web 2 front ends, again, they have weak security, weak privacy, there's lack of transparency, and then they're connected into a Web 3 system, but they can obfuscate it, through the Web 2 front end. And so, for example, nobody knows what happened with FTX in terms of billions of dollars. That's because the Web 2 front end is basically blocking access to everything that happened within the company. So So it's very important to understand that Web 3 systems don't exist yet, right? They are in process of being created. If you've heard of DAOs, if you've heard of decentralized exchanges, if you look at any kind of layer 1 protocols like a Bitcoin or an Ethereum type of ecosystem, or Polkadot, or many others, there's all of these features exist in those ecosystems, but they're not big enough yet so that a lot of people are using them. But as they, would build out, they would build out this type of infrastructure. Today, we have what we call Web 2.x. 2.x is a hybrid between Web 2 systems and Web 3 systems. And the ones that are being hacked and are in the news are the ones that are these Web 2.x with the Web 2 front end, which has all of the failures and failings of the existing Web 2 infrastructure.
As a last point, I'll just say that this is why our thesis is decentralized everything. I mean, we really believe in the decentralization as a key foundation for really everything that we do. Otherwise, we still leave ourselves vulnerable to the deficiencies and failures of a Web 2-based system.
So, are there any questions about any of that before we get into the actual social impact use cases? Because this is really foundational. If you understand this, you can understand why Web 3, is a starting point for social impact, and Web 2 cannot be, right? And that's why you can have hundreds of years of people trying to create real social impact with Web 2 systems, and many of these they might have, some level of efficacy, but overall nothing is changing.
I'll just say too that, as we're talking about foundations, this is something that is so important. If this foundation is truly established in Web3 fashion, as we are advocating basically for, the world will see a very different type of dynamic. We've been talking about key concepts like trust, transparency, honesty, even auditability, which basically is the other side of compliance, security, privacy. These are all central. They're not just concepts; they're requirements for the future and for the present. Even what we have seen is the consistent failing of systems that haven't supported those tangible, sacrosanct sort of pillars that we need for all of these constructs to work efficiently on behalf of everyone, not on behalf of the few. So if we really want to move to more equitable systems, as we're going to be talking about in some of the use cases, we really need for that transparency and security and privacy to be supported at the most foundational level. Otherwise, it just doesn't. It becomes something that it be aspirational and a nice to have rather than a must have.
Yeah,
I
Nina?
see Nina's got her hand up.
Yeah.
I don't have a question, but thank you so much for explaining it, because this is, I haven't really looked into it much, so it's quite new to me, but as you're talking about it, it is pretty much a replica of what I've done in real life communities. So I have been transitioning teams out of hierarchy into self-management, which is all about decentralization, building trust, transparency, and so on. So actually hearing how you have explained it made it really easy for me to understand, because I've kind of done that with people rather than with systems and with, organizational structures, not within obviously how we work with the web. So thanks so much for explaining it. And it's really, really insightful. And it's one of my first kind of foundation and introduction to this topic.
Yeah, that's wonderful. People that do create change do, like you say, Nina, use these as foundational tools for building trust. The thing is, this gives you a framework, right? This gives you a framework that you can build off of. And if, the systems that you're trying to build, many times you can't use the existing systems, right? If you try to use Web 2 systems, that trust is broken, right? People no longer have access to information. And then there's temptation, right, to monetize data and without letting people know what's going on. And this happens constantly.
I think, Jorden, if I might add to this, it really comes down to human nature. Mm-hmm. And so if you have a system in which human nature can basically run amok, it will happen. Because human nature is, unfortunately, as ingenious as human nature can be, human nature also has its failings, which is if you can find a way around the system, you will try to skirt something, you'll try to stretch the boundaries of what's possible. And unfortunately, in a Web 2 based system or a centralized system, that incentivization for getting to all of it, right? Keys to the kingdom, so to speak, is something that is very, very tempting, and it's financially incentivized. And so we continue to see breaches proliferating into ransomware attacks and so on that are so insidious that really impair the opportunity of an organization to be able to provide the service that it wants to provide. And that can be so debilitating and so destructive. So that destruction is possible because it can be, right? When you have a system that immediately is constructed with saying, well, we can't do that. You can't breach the system. Where's the incentive to do that, right? And so there's the checks and balances that are present already in these types of systems, in Web3 based systems, are really designed to prevent such breaches from occurring, right? And so when we talk about foundational types of pillars that are supported, that's really for the benefit of all rather than the benefit of the few. So if you really think about Web 2 systems, Jorden and I always talk about the zero-sum game, right? Winner takes all, zero-sum game. It doesn't matter. You can basically ride on the backs of others. And that is indeed what happens in Web 2 based systems or centralized systems. In decentralized systems, it's for the benefit of the community. It's for the benefit of all. And so this sharing and this transparency and this compliance, so to speak, through this transparency and the auditability of these systems, as Jorden has pointed out, is really something that empowers everyone in that system to be true to the system. Very different concept.
Yeah, very different concept. And if you look at, just think about the news, think about what's in the news every day, right? What dominates the headlines? It's usually disputes, right? People saying, this is what happened, and someone saying, no, that didn't happen, this is what happened. And that's most of the news, right? That's the majority of the news, but that's also, you know, all protected. So this ability to hide in the shadows and, you know, keep what happened and the information secret and private is what enables a lot of people to generate power, right? And the ability to say, oh, I have information that you don't have. This is what actually in the business world, and people say that data is the new, you know, new gold or whatever. This is what creates the multi-trillion-dollar companies versus those that, you know, those that have and those that don't have, and leads to a breakdown in sharing, right? Because people don't want to share, because if they share, they're giving up gold, they're giving up money, right? They're giving up things. So it leads to a breakdown between systems, a siloing and isolation. And then you have a lot of people throughout the world who are saying, no, everyone's saying such and such happened, but that didn't happen, you know, and everything is fine. Just look over here. And then this is what's dominating, you know, global headlines all the time. So what we want to talk about is, how do you change this broken system, right? So the system is broken. And a lot of people in this broken system can figure out how to game the system so that, like Radhika said, it's a zero sum. They benefit and everybody else does not, right? Everything that should go to other people kind of goes to one person or a small group of people. So they amass a whole bunch of power or wealth, and they kind of hide how that's happening. And then everybody else is left with nothing, right? Which is the haves and the have-nots. And this has dominated for thousands of years. So, you know, in order to do that, you have to have kind of a fundamental shift. One of the fundamental shifts is ownership, right? Ownership of something, ownership of land, ownership of, you know, of data today is very important. But if you look online, none of us have identity that is, you know, our sovereign right. We do not have what's called data sovereignty. Our data is owned, like we mentioned, by other people, and they give us access to this data. They give us identity. When you go online, you know, some big network gives you, an identity, our username and password, but they can also take it away from us, right? There's all these rules of service or terms of service. And if you breach those, you lose everything that you have within that. You don't have access to your account. You don't have access to your money. You don't have access to whatever it is that they are providing, their services. So the idea is you have to really change the whole foundation. So there's a decentralized identity. The identity is not based on some trusted entity giving it to us.
Go to the next slide, Jorden?
It's just a right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is really the concept here is decentralized identity. And this digital identity is really a foundation point. It needs to be private, portable, and persistent. And it allows us to own things, right? To have unique online ownership. And you might probably heard that an NFT, for example, is basically a proof of ownership of a unique, digital asset. That's really what an NFT is. It provides ownership of things online. And the reason that so many people fight it is because ownership of data is everything, right? Online. If you don't have ownership of data, you can't monetize. And if you can't monetize, you are always going to be a small player. So ownership is key.
Think about, we talked about big entities owning our data. Well, what do they do with that data? right? They're monetizing it. And how are they monetizing it? It's tied to advertising, for example. So if you've ever used Google AdWords or Facebook campaigns, but what are they doing? They're really allowing you to search for keywords, select a target audience, and say, I want to reach this type of audience with this demographic. Well, where do you think they got that information from? It's all of the things we share about ourselves in those systems, and they own all of that data, and they can slice it and dice it in any which way they want for you to then for them to be able to charge you to be able to say, well, I want to reach this, or I want to have a campaign. All of it is based on identity of the individuals that comprise that system, that contribute data to that system, and they have ownership over all of it. And so when they have visibility over the entire network in that fashion, it basically creates those business models that have allowed them to become incredibly wealthy as organizations, as businesses.
Now, with digital identity, you can actually create revolutions basically in every industry, including, social impact. So, but, once you own your data, for example, you could have personalized healthcare because your data goes with you and people know, you can share your data with your care provider, your financial services, your banks. You actually have, ownership of all of your money. They can't stop you. We just had bank collapses. They're saying you can't have access to your money because we're not giving it to you. We own your money, right? So once you have, it travels with you. You don't have to worry about a bank run because you always have access to your money. It's not tied up with someone. Telecommunications, e-government, you actually have access to your information, your birth records, your death records, your vaccination records. All of this is something you have with you at all times. And that gives you, a certain level of power within society.
In fact, talking about e-government, really proud of the fact that as a member of the blockchain working group here in California, which is advising Governor Newsom and the California State Legislature, we just passed in California the first law that basically says all vital records of all Californians are going to be available on the blockchain, which is pretty revolutionary because it means that the vital records, be it marriage or death or any other vital record, so to speak, is something that is going to be attached to something permanent, which is the blockchain. It's immutable. And so you will have less fraud. So it's easier for the government to have to deal with a system like this. But it also means that we're going to have ownership over our own data, right? And yes, there are issuing bodies like the state that is going to record those events, if you will, and issue those records to attest to those events. But we will have ownership and control over that, which is hugely empowering, right? When you think about a state of California having 40 million residents and giving the residents of California full right over those vital records, that's pretty astounding. So I'm really happy to say, this is why I say, talk about policy being a very important aspect of this, is as we create the ecosystems around this, we need to have systems that are going to support what we need in the future, right?
Yeah, our birth certificate, which, conveys citizenship within countries and things like this, it's very critical that we have, access to it and we can prove who we are in many situations. If that gets lost, which it does from time to time, especially in war zones or things like this, you can have what's called identity genocide. And this leads to people losing all their rights within society. And there's over 1 billion people that don't have identity in the world today. And if you look at at the foundation of a lot of lack of financial inclusion, is people can't prove who they are. They can't prove who they are. They can't prove they're a citizen of a country. And as a result, they can't get access to services. They can't, function in society. So being able to have identity, we take it for granted. But if you've ever been in a situation where you couldn't prove your identity, or you could prove it and then the system still didn't give you access to something, that's where these centralized systems come into play. And this, in a Web3 kind of an ecosystem where there's power sharing and everyone has access to their own data, doesn't exist. You always have access to who you are and your own, your own records, etc.
If you think about how do you prove your identity? I mean, how do we prove it these days, right? They'll say, well, do you have a passport? Do you have a photo ID of some sort? Maybe it's a social security card or a number. Maybe it's your utility bill to prove that you reside at that address and you've been receiving utility bills to that address. There are many other sort of antiquated systems of establishing identity. Modern systems and decentralized identity systems are going to not only have biometrics as a base requirement for establishing identity, but it also means that we're going to own that identity. So no matter what, we will always have access to those documents or that way of proving who you are as an individual. In some countries, you actually have to show up in person. And even when you show up in person, they say, well, prove to me who you are. And you're standing there, right there in front of the window saying, well, I'm here. Well, who are you? Prove to me that you are who you are. So identity is such a complex topic. And many of the systems that we've seen up till today haven't really fully addressed the requirements of what it is to have true identity. And then when you take that further into digital land, which everything has gone digital basically, how do you prove that you are who you are from a digital perspective? So this decentralized identity system is going to have a really very robust mechanism for establishing identity and giving a person full control and sovereignty over their identity and ownership of everything that they have under that.
Yeah, once you can prove who you are and then you have access to your data, that's kind of a foundational point within society where you can have kind of equal standing with everyone else, right? If you don't have that, and what you see in most people and in the developing world is you have inequity and inequality in terms of being able to prove this. Or it can be manipulated, right? Because you have systems where, and this happens a lot in the world, is that you are living in a house on a particular plot of land, and then someone comes and they are able to convince a government official to change who owns your land and who owns your house, and they basically can have you kicked off your land and out of your home. And in many parts of the world, there's a lot of court cases which are disputes because a person is living somewhere, they're on the land, they've been there maybe for generations, but all of the government records have been changed through bribery or corruption, etc., so that it looks like someone else owns everything and has owned it for a very long period of time. And this, again, leads to people losing, something of value. Land is valuable. Your home is valuable. And if this is done en masse, then people can lose access to kind of the core of all their wealth and the core of their ability to function within society. They can become homeless, etc. And this is, again, can just be done by switching information around, right? So the information gets switched, immutability within these platforms and ownership of the documentation is critical so that people, regardless of circumstance, it always shows rightful ownership and it cannot be manipulated through bribery or corruption. So that's what, can be provided within a blockchain-based infrastructure because blockchains are immutable. They cannot be changed once the information is laid down. And that's a feature, a very important feature.
But it's not just a feature. I think it's a central component, right?
It's
you can amend you can't edit or delete or do anything. You can amend the record. I think let's move through the use cases pretty quickly because I think we're kind of running short of time already. If I can see this, I mean, these are very intense topics. They're very loaded in terms of the implication of what this means. But let's move through these use cases really quickly. Everybody's might have heard of NFTs, non-fungible tokens. What are they? Really what they are a verifiable proof of ownership of a unique or rare digital asset, right? And so when you have digital assets, we're not just talking about what's in the news, which is a picture or a piece of artwork or what have you. We're really talking about any type of ownership based on anything. So it could be a deed of trust. It could be title to a car. It could be to any of those things where we have to prove, again, ownership over something that is unique or rare. It can even be IP. So intellectual property for companies can also be something that can be represented as an NFT. The NFT, the non-fungible token, means that it's not changeable, right? This is something that is unique and rare, and therefore the identity and ownership of that particular asset is something that you can prove via an NFT, right?
Yeah. So this is a critical foundational point, because of the news and all the stuff that's been going on, this has been lost, which is actually the central point, is these things, whatever you want to call them, because they're called NFTs, they convey this ownership, which is really critical, because if you think about online, everyone owns nothing. Nobody owns anything online. The only thing that's owned is owned by large corporations, big tech, banks, all of these different organizations own everything. And that's why they're so valuable. So in order to get ownership back, like if you're a creator, you want to create something and you want to have verifiable ownership of that so you can sell it. People can't copy it, right? They can't make a, claim that they made it or create thousands of copies and sell them as, counterfeit or fraudulent items. So this is a fundamental capability that needs to exist if you're actually going to have equity online and the ability for everyone to monetize. That's unfortunately been lost. But this concept is not going away.
Well, yeah, I think, what we've been doing is using NFTs in a rather unique way, right? We created this collection that has a mission-driven purpose. Again, everything that we're doing has a mission behind it. There is a social impact purpose. And what is this social impact purpose for AstroSapiens? Our vision and mission is to really support this diverse and unique community we call the human race. For anyone on Earth to have anyone in our human community to have the same access to everything that we hold sacred, right? So for everyone to have this opportunity to develop themselves fully, to aspire for the stars, to reach for the stars, to really be able to have the access points to everything that is needed to pursue those ambitions is something that we hold as a basic human right, right? And so the way we envision this collection, first of all, it's a diverse representation of the ecosystem. We started with a very small subset of what diversity truly means. We understand that diversity is a much fuller perspective, a much fuller spectrum. So we started with gender-based identity. So our collection is balanced between traditional genders of male and female. Our collection is also balanced in terms of people of color and not people of color or, white or Caucasian looking people. So we try to at least establish some sense of equity and balance on those two fronts. But of course, we recognize that the future of the collections are going to be exposing or illustrating, not exposing, but illustrating other dimensions of diversity. It could be neurodiversity, it could be other demographics, age, for example. And the mission, again, is to support projects to create, first of all, a very vibrant community that is Web3 based, that has a decentralized autonomous organization attached to it. And then that DAO will drive the efforts of the AstroSapiens Foundation, which is a nonprofit foundation dedicated to awarding grants to communities or projects that are having social impact, right? And so last year, Jorden and I have basically founded this organization and seeded this organization and are leading the efforts in building this community, thought, let's start with impact on day zero, right? We don't want some impact to be there in the future. Let's start on day zero or day one to say what the social impact is going to be. So we supported the Space Foundation, which is one of the US based oldest space advocacy organizations, and their particular project called the Moon Colony Project, which was developed in collaboration between the Space Foundation, NASA, and the White House. And so this was a huge initiative to give children of grades 4 through 8 across the country really access to information about what it is to pursue a career in space. And so it's a gamified sort of curriculum that was offered to these 20,000 children through this program, and 5,000 teachers who are going to be working with the students on this. And the teachers were also given training through the Space Foundation and NASA. So the whole purpose of this program, again, is so that children predominantly from underprivileged backgrounds would have access to knowledge about what it is to have a future in the space sector. This is one of those great sectors that is going to be experiencing great growth. It's also been inspired by the Artemis space project. You might have seen the Artemis Test 1 rocket fly, and then recently we had amazing news that the 4 astronauts have been selected for phase 2 of Artemis. And that includes, for the very first time, a woman and also a person of color. So when you think about that visual, that space travel and walking on the moon is no longer going to be only for white men. It can be for anybody, people that look like us, basically. That's a huge visual, right? And it's something that becomes incredibly tangible and concrete. So the hope is to inspire future generations of people that are going to be living and working on the moon, which is the whole purpose of Artemis. So that is one of the projects that we backed last year. These children have had an amazing ride. There's lots of videos that we shared in terms of what the teachers were able to do with the children and their excitement about having sparked their imagination in the process. Also, we backed Mission Impact, which is a nonprofit that is dedicated to really hoping that 1 million women can be brought into Web3 in the metaverse. We don't want to wake up tomorrow and say, oh, wow, we're left behind once again. So the whole purpose is in this Web3 to level the playing field of opportunity. And we thought we absolutely have to back that kind of a mission. We also backed Women of the Future, which is the book that I've been selected for, as well as Jorden being one of the 10 male allies who is illustrated in the book. And we supported this book, which is, by the way, just a gorgeous book in which we're featured. And it's been such a pleasure to support this project as well, again, because we don't want any more hidden figures, right? If anybody says, well, where are all the women? There's 100 of them in this book, all creating amazing impact in the world. And then future volumes to come. So this year there'll be volume 2 and beyond.
Yeah, nominations are currently open for the next set.
Exactly. So I think that, this is an example of the mission-driven purpose that we chose to highlight. We did this with a great deal of passion and vision. And I think as we go forward, we're really looking forward to developing the partnership between the SheFab community and SheFanPro to extend this impact and combine efforts in meaningful ways so that this impact is again available to all.
Yeah. And there's a lot more. That's just really the foundations, right, of what you need. So we wanted to really talk about, what you need is the foundation for social impact. And it was great to hear, Nina, that you are using many of these things. In terms of the extreme transparency and the decentralization, allowing people to help themselves and people to their voices to be heard, within a community. That's really what a DAO or a decentralized autonomous organization is all about. There's so many of these things that we could go into a lot more detail. In our community,
maybe we'll do a session 2 to talk about the specific cases, because I think it's very important.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think we need a part 2 and a part 3, and I think that's definitely needed, because there's so much information to get out there, and there's so much knowledge and information that the two of you can impart on our audience, and it's very difficult to capture that in one session, isn't it? Because suddenly the session feels quite short, doesn't it? Because there's just so much information. So I think we definitely do need to look at part 2 and part 3s, and because it's fascinating to those that are aware of this space, but it's deeply intriguing and fascinating as well to our audience that perhaps don't know about Web3 and NFTs and everything else, and it's really informative, I think, and it's delivered in such a way that is meaningful and understandable, and interesting, you know, and I think that's so important. And the two of you are, I mean, just amazing. You know, that you just present, have the ability, don't you, just to present everything in such a way that, you know, it just keeps you fixed the whole time. You just want more of it, you know. It's amazing. It's fabulous.
Well,
Great.
thank you. It's our vision, and it's you know, what they say, it's just not vocation, it's avocation as well. So this is something we're so firmly, deeply entrenched, us doing things in this ourselves, but also then enabling others to come up. And that's really the key. I mean, you know, one of our members of our community in our community session talked about, you know, not just giving fish to people, but teaching people how to fish, right? Yeah. It's really about personal empowerment. That's really our goal, because we want this community of doers and dreamers to be actually able to dream and then do and execute on their dreams. And that's really what life is about, is if we can create more of us with those ambitions and aspirations, then we've done something good in that process, and shared knowledge. You started, Soumya, you started with a beautiful quote. I think it was so apropos. I truly appreciate that you started with that quote, because I think for Jorden and me, we're lifelong learners ourselves, and we are deeply entrenched in education in every part of what we do. Every session we have in the community, for example, is all based on education, because when you empower somebody with vision and knowledge, they can take that and do something productive in their lives. And that's really, you know, something that we again are so passionate about. So thank you for starting with that very, very meaningful quote of Nelson Mandela. Very apropos. Thank you.
Yeah, and you know, there are so many people that are fighting for change, or they're fighting to help people, but they're starting in a system that is actually not conducive to that change. It actually is built so that change cannot happen. So you're really swimming up against like a tsunami, right? It's like going to swamp you. It's not like you're
swimming upstream.
You are, you know, going to get buried with that initiative, because the whole system is set up not to allow what people are trying to do. So the idea is to actually change to a system where this change that you're trying to do is encouraged and is actually foundational, right? Because that's the precepts of what it's built on. And like Nina was pointing out, right, that this extreme transparency and people, you know, having a voice and being decentralized. So you really have to start with a system that looks like that, and that's Web3. But people don't know that, right? They don't know it.
Exactly. So, you know, for the benefit of our audience and anybody that's, you know, obviously watching back on the replay, how do they find out more? If they want to reach out to you, they want to ask any questions, or they want to become involved in some way, shape, or form, what do they do?
Yeah, well, we're on LinkedIn, so you know, people can connect with us on LinkedIn. We also have a community, like we
mention where you saw this or how you came to know about us. That's appreciated, instead of just sending a connect, because we get so much incoming, and we really try to understand, well, who is this person? Why are they reaching out to us, right? So a little bit of context would be appreciated with that.
Yeah, I mean, in the future, we would give our wallet address, and there's, you know, wallet messaging. That's our identity, but you know, and there was actually just a company. It just came out a couple of days ago. We put up the information in our community, which does just this wallet messaging, and they raised over $100 million. They're called Layer Zero, and they are worth over 3 billion right now. It's probably going to get significantly larger. So there is this whole move to decentralize everything. It's kind of quiet, right?
Well, this is what we said. Our thesis is decentralize everything.
There's unicorns, right, that are being created that are very much focused on this. The thing is to actually have a very diverse and inclusive foundation, and not just more of the status quo. That's,
also, I just wanted to mention that you know, they can look at our website, which currently is going undergoing some transformation. So we've got a new website that will be coming up, but they can go to https StarChain.vc, and that's a great resource of you know, who we are, what we're doing, and learning more about we're doing. But yeah, to connect with us directly, I would say LinkedIn is probably the best
Yeah,
way.
and there's also our group, which is the
Yes, the
AstroSapiens
Sapiens community.
on LinkedIn. And there's astrosapiensnft.com, which we showed where people can get more information.
Right.
But yeah, LinkedIn is currently the easiest way. Hopefully we won't have to say that in a few years.
We, we can provide, if it's useful, a set of links maybe to the various, to not only our LinkedIn profiles, but also our website and also AstroSapiens, the community, to help, again, the community efforts, that particular project. Shelle is also on our website, so our soon to be released website. Stay tuned; it'll probably be there in the next week or two, hopefully. So that's our goal.
Perfect. Yeah, and if you can provide those, then we can certainly circulate those along with this interview here. That would be amazing. So, suffice to say, thank you so much, both of you. I always I could just listen to you all day long, both of you, because you're such lovely human beings, and I love what you're doing, and I love your mission. And whenever I'm available, and and I'm on a call with either of you, or as part of the community, I always find it really enriching. And so I wanted to thank you for being here today, but also to invite you warmly back again in the future, because I firmly do feel that we need a part 2 and 3 and more. I think that has to be done. Without further ado, I'm going to hand you back to Soumya now, because I'm sure Soumya has some closing words, don't you, Soumya?
Thank you, Ms. Shelle. So first of all, I would like to thank Ms. Radhika Iyengar Emens and Mr. Jorden for delivering us such wonderful concepts regarding Web3, that too with respect to social impact. And first of all, I would like to say, I always love Ms. Radhika Iyengar Emens' way of talking and her approach regarding public policy, and the way she advocates it. Talks about the laws, the compliance, how impacting at a policy level has a wider impact when compared to from a small community or a individual perspective. So that I always love it. And I also love the way she explains about the duality of human nature, how there's a positive and there's a negative. She was talking about there's a genius and there's also a fool, or the other at the end. So she showed us this both spectrum of human nature, and that's how she connected it to Web 2 and Web 3. So that's how she said she explained about how Web 3 can beautifully benefit from all the negative aspects of human nature. Where in Web 2 you don't have that kind of security or the benefits. And I would also like to thank both of you for explaining about the Web 3 ethos. Ethos, which means trust. I know even Nina, she was always talking about this trust, and Shelle fantastic also, she chooses individuals with trust. So the way you explain about why. So why this is needed and why everything is needed. So that's been, it's beautiful and it's simple. Now every person over here can understand what you've explained in a very simple manner. So I think even a novice who's new to this field, they can understand from whatever you've explained. So the Web3 ethos, like share data, peer-to-peer, decentralized network, community-driven, then self-governing, power symmetry, the information symmetry, all these things which you've explained. And then you also told about the Web3 drivers of transformation, the secure source of truth to shared ledger, automation of decentralized transactions, tokenization, open source software. And you also explained this difference between Web3 and the Web 2, with respect to the ownership, how it's from one person ownership or single person ownership to joint or community-based ownerships to, the weakness, how security can be breached in Web 2, but then you have a better security in Web 3. And so many things we discussed about equality, equity, privacy, security, transparency, compliance, all these things which every person wants in their life when compared to, and even every company needs. That's what they want. So and the way you told about the social impact, the cases. And I should be thankful to both of you because, first of all, you're such beautiful human beings who are always working for this social impact. And the way you've supported projects like Space Foundation, where you discussed about 20,000 children being supported, 5,000 teachers being trained, how you're fighting for gender equality and color, different discriminations to be eliminated, and the projects like Mission Impact, Women of Future. And yes, I would also love to read your book because I think I'll learn more about the digital identity that you've explained about, decentralized identity, all the things. I would like to know more about it. So I will definitely read and recommend others. And also would like to know more about the NFTs because you told regarding how art, it's not just for art, but for anything related to ownership and how you could use it with respect to AstroSapiens and StarChain Ventures. So would like to know more about it in the future seminars and discussions. And thank you a lot for such wonderful seminar. And thank you for being such wonderful human beings. So thank you.
Thank you,
so much.
Sumia.
You're all beautiful human beings as well. Really,
Well,
thank
we're
you.
all
Outstanding.
we're all behind the scenes.
Things.
We are behind the scenes.
Yeah.
We are so aligned, and we're really honored and delighted to be here and to share. And we're looking forward to building as well.
I just love it. What a great atmosphere in here today. I mean, you can really just feel it. It's just amazing. I absolutely love it. Thank you, Sumia, for doing such a wonderful summary and conclusion. Absolutely outstanding as always. You're a real treasure. Thank you very, very much. Thank you, Nina, for joining. I hope you've enjoyed it. And thank you to our audience that are watching back on the recording as well. I would invite you all to connect with Jorden and Radhika. If you have any questions or want to get involved, I'm certainly very much involved. We're very much involved here at SheFab and SheFanPro, and will continue to be so, and to support what they're doing because they're good human beings and you can learn a lot from them too. So, anyway, without further ado, I'd love to thank you both for being here, Jorden and Radhika, and look forward to catching up again with you in the not too distant future.
Okay, well, we look forward to it too. So thank you.
Thank you. Take care, everybody. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.